one thing we were talking offline before we jumped on here, and we have some exciting news. Like, our podcast is out there in the world.
Well, Wendy, like how many people have listened to it
I don't know.
besides the three of us,
I don't know.
right?
Super
I don't
exciting
know.
though.
It is. It's just sharing our message and our thoughts and how we feel like we can help people and hopefully make a difference for people. And I had the opportunity to listen to all of them. My mom and I did a road trip, and I'm just super proud of us and the work that we have done. I mean, this has been a work in progress, right? Um, and also, right, it's also noticing that we're, as Karen likes to say, we're only ever always learning. And so, we just ask that you give us a little grace if you notice some things that we aren't complete experts yet. But guess what? We're trying our best and we're having fun, aren't we?
I think one of the things I really liked was, do you mind sharing what your mom said?
Oh, yeah. So my mom said, I mean, I'm not a leader, and I mean, I don't really listen to this kind of stuff. I really need to listen to this stuff. And first of all, I said, hello, you're a major leader in your church and you led our family for how many years? You are a leader and you have huge influence. But what she said after that was, but oh my gosh, even I'm learning so much, at this point in my life. And she said, you can just apply this to everyday life. I'm like, yes. It isn't just for, yes, it's about culture. Yes, it's about leadership, but that doesn't mean just in a corporation or organization. It's in anything. And all of us I know are really passionate about that, right? When we think about culture and leadership, we're talking about that from the perspective of all aspects of life and how we show up and how we can influence.
Well, and I think it's one of the things too, like an organization can carry a culture so far, but it's the individual belly buttons and their heartbeat and their pulse and their passion that make it come alive. So I love the fact that your mom brought that up, um, for a couple of reasons. Number one is, I think for me, what it's really taught me is how to deal with life on life's terms, because life throws us some junk. And maybe we watch an organization deal with it, like change and adapting and all of those and drama. And that's good for an organization. But I think when you teach individuals how to do that, that's
Hmm.
where all this stuff really comes alive. And I love watching that. So I love the fact that your mom brought that to life.
Yeah. Yes. And there are a few, friends and family members who don't necessarily play in the space that we do, right? They haven't been in corporate America, um, and they've said similar things, and so it's just pretty cool to watch that and hear that. And so, thank you too, because obviously, you bring so much to just what we do and just the world in general, and I mean that very honestly and from the bottom of my heart. So, thank you.
Well, you are welcome. You do as well.
Well, and I want to acknowledge that it probably wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for Scott and so much that you've experienced. And we look forward to diving into more of that together with you. But this is really being able to look back and see. We know that when leaders in the organizations don't have like that strong, healthy culture, what happens? And you got to see that, you got to experience that, you also got to transform into a healthy culture. And so we can't wait to talk more about that with you and learn more about what that means, um, and how to help others be able to build a more healthy culture.
I
Well, I'm
agree,
looking
Karen.
forward to it.
Hmm.
Yay.
Just being able to add it, I mean, all of us have real life experiences, but especially
Sure.
with what Scott's doing, like it's
Mm-hmm.
very helpful. So, if we look back to what we've been talking about saboteurs and what holds us back. And so we've talked about several of the saboteurs. And today we wanted to jump in to the final three. And those final three are hyper rational, hyper vigilant, and victim. And for those of you that haven't heard us talk about this before, there's a body of work called Positive Intelligence. And if you go to positiveintelligence.com, you can go and there's a place that you can take the saboteur assessment. And so it gives you the results on honestly what's holding you back in life from optimizing who you are and moving forward. But listen to our previous two episodes if you want to hear more about what this assessment, what this work is all about. So, how about we dive into describing hyper rational today? Karen's very excited
Sure.
about this because this is one of Karen's. You'll hear us say louder, right? This is one of her louder saboteurs,
Mhm.
and we all have those. And honestly, I really feel like that's when we know it's true that these show up for us is we go, ew, gross.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like as we're hearing this but at the same time, again, the impact of this work to have the level of self-awareness and be able to connect with, oh my gosh, that does come up for me. And yes, it does hold me back when it's loud. Like being rational isn't an issue, right? We need that ability to be rational, but it's when we are add the hyper to it. So in any of these saboteurs, when we take them too far, that's when they're going to hold us and then of course others back too. So let's Karen, do you want to describe hyper rational and then I can add, or do you want how do we want to approach this?
Yeah. Coming from my own hyper rational, let's see. Um, it's funny, I want to kind of give a little bit of grace here to these saboteurs because since we've been doing this work, one of the things that I've just started to recognize is aside from the fact that there are all very positive attributes to each one of these saboteurs, but like what you just mentioned, Wendy, is the hyper part. It's the over indexing of them. And the ability, some more recent information that I have started to explore is what is going on when we have really low saboteurs also. And when they're very low, there may be a little bit of defiance there. And I definitely want to be able to spend some time and get into that. But notice my hyper rational already. Okay, so here we go. Hyper rational.
We're with you,
Really,
girl. We're with
the,
you.
the need to understand everything and the need to be understood. And so this is where I think oftentimes we see that hyper rational come out when in an organization when there's decisions that need to be made. Oftentimes this is the one that comes needing to I'm going to say BF it. And for all of you that know what that means, it's just overthinking through it, right?
Mhm.
Um, Again, it comes back to this strong need to understand, the strong need to be understood. If you're the one trying to explain something or help everyone else, it's important for you that everyone else understands, right?
Mhm.
It can slow things down. It can actually be a benefit because, of course, this is how we take time to be able to look at every aspect of it from A to Z. But you can notice that the over indexing really gets to that point of, well, how much really do we need to BF this? And is this really worth our time? Well, that's debatable. And again, how it can be misconstrued by others, especially when they're not hyper rational, it's very hard. It's very hard to kind of come together on that, right?
Yeah. Yes. And I maybe what we could do is I will describe it too from the perspective of the way positive intelligence also
Sure.
defines it, because what you said, Karen, of course, is very true. And the other thing that I want to say, and I think we might have brought this up last time, Um, but when we think of these saboteurs, we can always think of the positive side of it. What we invite you into is to really come from that place of what part of it holds us back. Um, and so for this one, it's that intense and exclusive focus on the rational processing of everything, as you said, including relationships. And we can be perceived when we have this loud, uh, hyper rational as cold, distant, and intellectually arrogant. And so then there's characteristics and there's thoughts and there's feelings and there's justification lies and there's the original survival function that comes from every one of these. And so Karen, especially because this is something that's loud for you. As I'm going through some of these things for the hyper rational, um maybe just talk about what really is true for you or what comes up for you and what is difficult for you because of it. And Scott, as we're going through these, anything also that comes up for you around it, whether you ever experience any of these things or when you do experience, because we all do to some degree, um, or if you notice it right at work or around others, and kind of what that can create. And so some of these characteristics, um, and Karen, I know you so well. So this part, like that intense and active mind, yes, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
constantly
Mm-hmm.
going. Um, Private, don't let many people into my deeper feelings. Mostly show feelings through passion and ideas.
Totally true.
Yeah. Prefer to just watch the craziness around me and analyze from a distance.
No, I like to get right into it. That's
Can
a
lose,
different saboteur, though,
yeah,
right?
I will talk about that one. Can lose track of time due to my intense concentration. And then high penchant for skepticism and debate. So let's just pause there and say around the characteristic side of it, what comes up for you there?
Well, going back to the intellectual arrogance, I have to bring my beloved father into this because this is his famous statement. And I've probably mentioned this before, and he says this still to this day: better to be thought ignorant than to open up your mouth and leave out all doubt. And so this is where my self worth is tied to how intelligent I can show up. And if I'm going to talk my way through something, then I better know what the hell I'm talking about, right? So I have to be the smartest person in the room. And that has come across in many instances as that's the intellectual arrogance. And so that's the ick factor that you talked about before. It's like that ooey gooey place of self like reflection and like, well, where is that over indexed? And
Mm-hmm.
having to find meaning in it, then understand and build that awareness and recognize that I get to dial it back.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll talk about some of that in a minute. But yeah, that's how it's tied to our self-worth, I think is the most fascinating aspect, because the minute that we can recognize that that's not true, then we can release the need to be that, right?
I love that you just brought that up because that is the exact question I was thinking. I'm like, should I ask this now? And I'm like, yes. So it is, for those listening too, it's what is the benefit of us being aware, right? Becoming self aware and then reflecting on, because that's
Mm-hmm.
like the next step of this, some of these saboteurs. And so for you, when you became more aware, and for you, and over the last years you have been,
It's a work in progress.
yeah, it is. But what is the benefit of it? And I heard you
Mm-hmm.
just say
Mm-hmm.
that, right? You're able to say, okay, now that is not where I need to put my self-worth. Talk more about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's often times where most of us find ourselves, it's in reflection after we screwed up, right? Where after we came into the conversation as needing to be hyper rational, let's say. Um, and that moment of opportunity to reflect and say, oh, yeah, that felt a little icky, or maybe that was a little came on too strong, or maybe I was shoving this down someone's throat. So that, that awareness afterwards is the moment where I can say, now, instead of having to shame myself and feel guilty about it, I have the opportunity to um, and the word responsibility comes up for me in all of these saboteurs, because I don't want us to think that responsibility is us having to take that level of shame and guilt responsibility. But
Mm-mm.
I do have the power now, the ability to respond. So taking that word responsibility now and reframing it into I have the ability to respond puts me in a very different position. That's the self power that I can come more, let's refer to is as maybe less over indexed and more integrating with these saboteurs. Which saboteur might I want to lean in to
Mhm.
release that hyper rational, right? Maybe I need to be a bit more of a pleaser and recognize, hey, other people have thoughts in here too, right?
Mhm.
Maybe I need to be a bit more of, um, I don't know, we could talk about the ways to release, but just the idea here for me was once I have that self awareness, how do I get to respond now, right? What do we get to learn if we're only ever always learning?
Yes. Yes, I love that. And then if we thought about, I think you've really kind of talked about some of the thoughts that come up for you, but feelings frustrated with others being emotional and not rational enough. And you mentioned that, earlier too. And then feeling different, alone, not understood.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And often skeptical or cynical about about situations. What comes up for you around just feelings that come up for you? Anything about that?
Well, I keep my cynicism to myself. Wait, did I just say that out loud? Did that sound a bit counterintuitive, contradictory? Bit. Yeah, I would say, um, yes, and until we have that ability to kind of go deep enough and say, oh, yeah, okay, I'm willing to look at that a little differently now. And maybe that is the way that comes across from other people's perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I tell you, it was really hard for me in the beginning. Oh, that was really icky to look at myself every morning in the mirror and be like, mm-hmm, yeah, that's you. And then start to love me, of have that self-love and self-acceptance, and recognize that, okay, I get to learn something here, I get to work with this, it doesn't have to limit me.
And I really do think that is the truth for all of the work that we've been talking about so
Mm-hmm.
far, right? When we've been talking about the levels of leadership and saboteurs and so forth, the more that we can become aware of it, the more we can do something about it if it's not serving us, right? How is it serving us or others? And if not, okay, well then how do I want to shift? Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's just, I talk about this a lot, is building the discernment muscle,
Mm-hmm.
right? Building that ability to peel back on the fear-based thought. Like, well, why is this the way that I was thinking and feeling? Well, of course, it's because I'm wrapped up in my tying my self-worth. My chain around my neck is tied only to, how much I joke about, do you remember Flava Flav
Yeah.
and how he has this big clock? Then I joke with my clients all the time about this is the this is how much we're putting into that. That's our reward. That's our badge of honor, so to speak, keeping us weighed down, and um so yeah, letting go of that, not necessarily needing to tie our self-worth to that, right?
Mhm.
The intellectual, being the smartest one in the room isn't, it's not helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Scott, what comes up for you around this when you hear us talk about the hyper rational and all that goes
Yeah,
into
I mean, well, I think one of the things too, Karen, is, I mean, you're brave enough to say that I got that from my father. So you've done some exploring. Most people
We love you, Dad.
maybe
it.
might not be brave enough to admit that, or even gone back in time to figure out where that came from. But as I'm listening to both of you, I was in a golf shop with a guy, and I said, oh, "That's a cool blue shirt." And he said, "It's purple." I said, "No, it's blue." He said, "I'm colorblind." And then for a minute, as I was listening to you, like I can't explain to him, right, that it's purple. I can't explain blue to somebody that's colorblind. Like I can try, but it's
Mm.
virtually impossible. And so when you say like hyper vigilant, like what does that mean and how does that impact? Most people would say, well, I'm not like that. And then if you like look, and so I would encourage people to go on and take the survey and look in regards to like where you are on that spectrum, because culturally the impact on other people is really important. But even more important than that is the impact on yourself. So how am
Mhm.
I getting paid back by doing that? Getting paid
Mhm.
back maybe through
Mhm.
ego or
Mhm.
whatever those issues are. And then how am I holding other people back when this behavior comes alive in me? And I just think I think it's fascinating because my dad was the same way. As he wasn't a big sports guy, so I couldn't talk to him about the Reds. And maybe I could, but I held that against him. Does that make any sense?
Mhm.
And so every time I would talk to him, I would always make sure I had all my facts like lined up. So I was like articulate and I was like accurate, and I wanted to make sure, that this was correct and everything was kind of lined up. But when I get around strangers and we're like, I'll free flow it. I mean, it's just now that could be, I don't think I'm a skeptic though. So hyper vigilant could sound like massive skepticism, eh,
Yeah. Yeah.
in my opinion.
Yeah.
So it's
Hi.
good stuff.
Go ahead, Wendy. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, you said something earlier, Scott, and then based on what Karen was saying, that I just feel like it's really important out of support of our listeners to say this. You know, Karen and I and Scott, honestly, are fortunate enough that in the work that we do as coaches, and then Scott just as a leader and leading an organization and the things that he does to have this work around continuing to develop ourselves around us constantly. For those of you that don't typically step into this, and so you have this level of self awareness, as as we talked about, it can feel icky, and if you don't give yourself grace and then find support for yourself around what to do with that information. So yes, sitting in it is part of it and reflecting on it. But then what to do with it and how to move forward is a whole nother thing, right? And that's where good coaches come into play, good leaders to lean into, mentors, sometimes therapists, right? Also. And so I just want to make sure that we're, asking our listeners to, if they need support in that, you know, to get that. So anything else, Karen, that you want to say about hyper rational?
Uh, no, because otherwise I would BF it.
Okay, moving right along then,
Yeah.
right? Okay. So hypervigilant is another one of our saboteurs. And hypervigilant, I believe, is really, I was just looking at our results, and it's on the lower end. And so Karen, maybe this is a time too to talk about that, but let me describe it first. So hypervigilant is that continuous intense anxiety about all the dangers and what could go wrong. So it's a vigilance that can never rest. Some of the characteristics might be, always anxious and chronic doubts about self and others, extraordinary sensitivity to danger signals, um, might seek reassurance and guidance in procedures and rules and authorities and institutions, suspicious of what others are up to. Some of the thoughts, and I say this because it's probably easy for people to connect with, is when is the other shoe going to drop? So we're always like, yeah, that's great, but when's something going to go wrong? Um, and I want to trust people, but I find myself suspicious of their motives. So, just feelings of, again, skeptical, cynical, often anxious, and highly vigilant. Some of the justification lies might be, if I don't look out for them, who will? And life is full of dangers. So, first of all, what comes up for the two of you around hypervigilant, whether it's about yourself or whether it's about what you notice in those that may come up for you when you think of hypervigilant?
Based on that explanation, I mean, two words come to life, and it's one is codependency, and the other one is massive control. Just it's I need control. And I really like the what you brought up earlier, Wendy, is, that maybe you can turn the conversation differently by asking really compelling questions. Like, where's this coming from? Does that make sense? Like, where's this coming from? Why is this important to you? And just trying to really ask compelling, deep questions to help understand. Because we don't know the episodes in people's lives
Mm-mm.
that's obviously triggered them for this control and codependency on people, places, and things. And if maybe we give people the space to talk about that, maybe we can learn something about them, and then also about ourselves. Because I
Yeah,
mean, I have
because
people in my life that, I mean, they live like that, and then there's a part of me, it's like I feel sorry for them. I'm like, wow, like why do you let all this stuff control you? I mean, it'll wear you out. It's
yeah,
exhausting.
and it goes back to what even, Karen's story about hyper rational. It's goes back to that original survival function, and for people that have a really loud hyper vigilant, it's because they, really felt the need that they didn't feel like they had a sense of safety and security. And so, I like how you brought up the control aspect, Scott, because, and also, what are you afraid of? All of these are based on fear, all of our saboteurs, um, but they come from different places. And so, even though control, it might sound like, okay, they're when we're hyper vigilant is because we're trying to control something. This one is because I'm don't feel secure and I don't feel safe. And so, exactly right. Going back to what is that question to ask yourself is, what is it that I don't feel safe or secure about? So, Karen, what's coming up for you around this?
I have a few things here. One is I've seen this show up with my clients in a couple of different ways, interestingly. One is that they're required to pay very close attention to risk in their responsibility, in their role. Or they're really good at that, and this increases their heightened sense of vigilance, right? So someone who is, a risk management officer, or someone that's chief control officer or something like that, has to be very vigilant, right? They have to be able to pay attention to risk. The other thing that's coming up for me is for those who have very low vigilant, Scott, you have very low vigilance. I have very low vigilance. This makes us fairly fearless. We don't necessarily look at things as risky, right? And that can sometimes lend itself as a bit of a problem for us. But going back to what you were just saying, Wendy, in terms of the question, what is it that you're not feeling secure about? Where do you feel unsafe? My favorite empowering question for the vigilant would be, what is the worst thing that could happen? And if you're able to take them all the way out, right? And this kind of goes back to that survival. There's a fear of dying part to this too, right? If we get that all the way out, then okay, so then what? Right? So then what? And the more that we can walk that vigilant out to see all the potential fears that they're justifying, that they've created the story in their heads, because they literally can see it. They see it as a reason to be fearful. Then they start to dial back that fear and recognize that there's nothing to be really afraid of, even if it is that worst case scenario, right? Um, so Scott, in terms of how hypervigilant does not show up for you, you were talking about this before. Where might there be, where has this not, let's talk about like under indexed. Where has it been that you have been willing to walk into the fire completely brave with no fear, and that having a slight bit of vigilance might have been somewhat useful?
Oh my, there's probably 1,000 examples.
Taylor's probably like, I can name
Yeah.
a few too.
Yeah. Like, so, um, yeah, I can't think of like one specifically. Um, but like I'll watch my wife, like if we're going to an airport, we're going somewhere that like things have to be lined up. And I'll watch her like behind me, like, where's he going? Like, what's going on? That's not the right way. That's not the right way to the gate. And I'm just like, boom, we're going.
Yeah.
I might look up later.
Yeah.
And well, when we were in Scotland with my dad and my brother and Taylor, it was just kind of, hey, I think I know what I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
and you get 75% of the way there, and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I'm at my flight and all of this stuff. So that's probably, what's really interesting. Doesn't like cicadas. I mean, Lori and I got married and it was like cicada season. It took like 13 years for
They
the
were
eggs to
singing for
hatch.
you.
You remember that? Because I think what really happened is COVID woke up all the cicadas of this trait in humanity in incredible
Yeah.
ways.
A lot of
Like,
fear. Mm-hmm.
oh, huge amounts
Mhm.
of fear and just all of the different comments and shenanigans and all of that stuff just rose its
Mm-hmm.
head in
Mm-hmm.
really
Yeah.
ugly ways.
And so, Wendy, what would be that empowering question for that fear?
Um, I'm just sitting here I'm being wowed by our conversation because I'm even thinking back. I can't help myself to think back to hyper rational because mine's at the bottom. So I like having thoughts about that. I'm like, my problem is I don't think I'm smart enough. And it seriously is. Like I struggle with that side. So like that's a whole nother conversation.
Interesting. Yeah.
Anyway, what was your question?
What, so like in thinking in here, your vigilant is around midway. So it's probably you're able to recognize
Mhm.
when you're able to leverage it and when you know you need to dial it back.
Yeah.
But for us who have it very really low, and for those in the world who it's very high, there's probably two different questions, right, Scott? Because I think for me, being a very low hypervigilant and you being a zero hypervigilant, we probably could be,
Yeah.
how do we, how is it, how can we leverage the strength? So for me, this is my mantra is you're not going to see me be that afraid of anything.
Mhm.
I'm not that afraid. I'm fearless. And that is defiant,
Mhm.
right?
So
There's a bit of defiance there.
for you then and me when I'm on this side of it because I can also speak to the other side but
Mm-hmm.
um maybe even like where is the risk in this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Slow down enough to look and think, where might there be some risk?
Yeah. um and then I loved your question earlier, or I don't remember, Scott or Karen, whether you said it, but what is the worst thing that could happen? And honestly, there was a period of time in my life that I promise you my hypervigilant was probably at the top. And so that is the question I ask myself.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's the only thing like it would help me to go there. Um and I think that question would help me then to move forward,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I could certainly get stuck in the hypervigilant where, um, it's almost like having daymares, like just constantly thinking about, okay, what's going to happen? That type of thing. Versus, okay, let myself go there. What is the worst thing that could happen? All right. Yep. Now I know that it could. Now, how can I move forward? So
Mm-hmm.
yes, I think there is a question for both sides of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think the serenity prayer is like a really beautiful example of that.
Yes, God.
So grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and then the courage to change the things that I can. And the most beautiful one is the wisdom to know the difference
Mm-hmm.
between the two. And especially we'll be on the golf course, and if someone will say, "Well, market's down 300 points," I'd be like, "Yeah, what are you gonna do about it?" you
Yeah.
know, you decided to play on that field. You knew the risks. I mean, what are you gonna do about it? You're in it. If you don't want to play the game, then jump out of the market, and
Mm-hmm.
you have no control over it, none.
Mm-hmm.
And then why is that? Why is that wigging you out? And what's really interesting is in that anxiety, you get paid back through that. No, I don't. I'm like, yes, you do. You're getting paid back. Well, that's ridiculous. I'm like, if you're getting paid back, and the exploration is understand like how am I getting paid back, and why is that important for me? Because otherwise, you wouldn't behave like that. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah. So
Don't bring up victimhood.
I know.
I'm like the mayor of victimhood. Let me get my gavel because I am
Yeah.
going to call court here in about 5 minutes.
Yeah. I think, so what do you think? Do you think we should go like describe it and then maybe we can kick off our next
I
episode
like that idea. I think
with more
we
about
plant a
it?
seed. Yeah, let's plant a seed.
Okay, perfect. So just to describe it, none of us like to be called a victim, right? That even was in our 7 levels of leadership when we talked
Mm-hmm.
about that. At the same time, at one point or another, or in some aspect of our life, I think we probably have all in some way um, had this hold us back. But so it's the emotional and temperamental, just as a way to gain attention and affection. And it's an extreme focus on internal feelings, particularly painful ones. And it's the martyr streak. And so when we are in this mode, if we're criticized or misunderstood, we tend to withdraw. We might pout, we might sulk. Um, when things get tough, we want to crumble and give up. And just sometimes also almost a repressed rage results in depression and anxiety, and then just that constant fatigue. So, yeah, so we planted the seed about what it is. And I
Mm-hmm.
think this one probably deserves a little bit more attention.
Mm-hmm.
And let's jump into that when we get back together next time. So, what is the when we talk about let's go inside and our listeners to, do some of their own work, what might that be? What might we ask them to do this episode?
Yeah, I think that um, in order to build that discernment muscle and recognize where some of this fear might be getting in your way, what would be your empowering question for yourself to release that saboteur?
Yeah, that's great. Terrific. With that, we'll see you next time.